everybody, welcome to part 2 in my tutorial on setting up your files for limited color printing. In this video we will be setting up our spot colors using two separate files, one being your bitmap inks. So as a reminder, limited color printing is when an offset printer is set up to only print with 2 to 3 inks on press. Where full color printing is using 4 inks, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, and one color printing uses 1 ink. Limited color printing sits between those two, using spot colors coming from libraries like Pantone and True Match. Why do we want to use this printing technique? Well, one, you get consistent color throughout the book. Where CMYK is always monitoring and adjusting inks during the print run, you're going to get slight variations from sheet to sheet. Spot colors are pre-mixed for a really pleasant and consistent reading experience. The second benefit is you get to print with colors outside the CMYK spectrum. Some colors you see in real life can't be reproduced in CMYK, and you can get them in Pantone and True Match. So you can get vibrant colors that most people aren't used to seeing in print. So today I'm going to show you how to set up limited color printing with separate files. This technique is great because it allows for a creator to use bitmap inks for super crisp ink lines paired with stunning spot colors. It's worth noting there are a couple of things to keep in mind about this technique. The workflow is a little clunky, not only for the setup of the final book files, but also for the art creation. So I recommend practicing these steps and thinking about how it'll affect your workflow. The second thing is if you like to use color holds, or another way of phrasing it, like if you tone your inks, that technique is a huge pain to do with separate files. So as always, I'm going to be working in Photoshop, which will be the best software to do this. And I'm going to go into my inks, and I'm going to highlight my ink lines BMP. So you're going to want to make sure that you have your bitmap inks ready to go. And another best practice is to make sure that your inks are done and approved before playing with color. You have a bunch of steps you have to make your inks, and you have a bunch of steps you're going to have to do to tone them. You don't want to have to take multiple steps back to make changes. So you want to just, not have to do a lot of extra work. If you need to learn how to create bitmap inks, make sure to check out episode 3 of this series on bitmap inks. So we have our file, and what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate this file. I recommend doing this because you don't want to actually do something where you accidentally save and lose the work in your original file. So we're just going to duplicate this, and I'm going to change the name to inks color. And then I'm going to open this up in Photoshop. All right, now that we have this in Photoshop, this is a good opportunity for us to remind ourselves what makes a bitmap. And if we remember, it only uses black pixels and white pixels. It doesn't even use gray tones. And for our purposes, we do need a file that can render gray tones, and we also need it to be able to handle additional colors. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to convert this from a bitmap file to a grayscale document. And to do that, we're going to go to Image, Mode, and Grayscale. And that's it. There's a chance you might get a pop-up asking about size ratio, and it has a default number at 1. That's fine. Just click OK. The second thing we need to do is we need to res down our file from anything between 300 to 600 dpi. And to do that, we go to Image and Image Size. But before you do anything, make sure the Resample button is checked. because if it is not checked, you'll notice how it groups the resolution with the width and the height. And if I were to change the resolution at this point, it is then also going to change the width and the height. And we don't want that, because we want to keep the physical size of this page to be exactly the same as the inks when we set them up in InDesign later. So just make sure you click that resample button, and you notice that it then just groups the width and the height. And I'm going to change my resolution to 600 dpi. Honestly, it's all contingent on your computer power. The higher resolution of 600 is good because it gives you the flexibility should you want to print at a larger trim at a later date. But honestly, printers can't handle color set at over 300 dpi anyways. And if you were to try to print over 600, you're going to get unpredictable color issues on press. So I'm just going to set it at 600 dpi, and I'm going to hit OK. And then I'm going to get our flowers back up here. So our next step is we need to look at our layers. So I'm going to go to Window, and I'm going to scroll down to Layers. And you're going to notice that the inks are on a background layer, but we don't want it on a background layer. We want them on a floating layer. So to do that, we just click the lock, and now it's on a floating layer. And next, we're going to add a white layer. So I just create a blank layer, fill it with white, and then I'm going to move that all the way to the bottom. So we're going to have our inks at the top, and then we're going to have a white layer at the bottom. So now that we have all this set up, now we're ready to add our second color. And to do that, we have to go to our channels. So if we go to Window, Channels, you're going to see that we have our gray, or the color for our inks. So that's going to be anything from 10% gray, 10% black to 100% black. To add our color, we're going to choose the options here, and we're going to scroll down to New Spot Channel. And you're going to notice a little pop-up here that has the name of the color and the swatch. So what we're going to do is we are going to click on the swatch, and you're going to go right into the color library. If you have not used this before, you're most likely going to see the traditional Photoshop color picker. But to get to the libraries, in the upper right corner, you're going to see a series of buttons, and on the bottom of those buttons is color libraries. And to choose different libraries, if you click on the book drop-down, you can choose whichever one you want to use. True Match, Pantone, whichever. I'm going to stick with Pantone, and then I'm going to choose my color. And then I'm going to hit OK. And then you'll notice the first pop-up is now populated with the new name and swatch. And I hit OK. And that's it. I've now added the color to my document. So in order to utilize that color, all I have to do is stay in the Channels panel and highlight the Pantone layer, and then I can paint. So I can add the purples wherever I want them to, at whatever opacity. I could even change this to 100 opacity, and I get the dark purple. You can change your brushes. And you're basically able to draw on this just as you would with your ink layers. So now that we have our file set up and we have our color, we've now just added our color. Now the next step is to assemble this in InDesign. But remember, we're working with separate files. So we're not going to want to keep the ink lines in this document. So if we go to our layers, so window and layers, you're going to notice that you have your inks on one layer and we have the white background. If I just click the inks, now my inks have been removed. And now the only thing that is left is my Pantone. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hit save. And what it's going to do is it's going to ask me to save it, but in a different file format. Because remember, this was originally inkcolor.bmp, but we can't save it as a bitmap because the bitmap won't allow gray tones or color. So we'll just save it as a Photoshop. Now we are ready to assemble this in InDesign. So if I go over here to InDesign, we have our page. You can use InDesign, you can use Quark Express. Honestly, InDesign is going to be probably, oddly, the most flexible equation out of this whole thing, because InDesign is just holding your art files so that they can be printed the right way. So we're going to look at our layers. So if I go down here to Window and Layers, we're going to find that InDesign has exactly the same kind of layer structure that Photoshop does. And I've created two layers, inks and colors. So I have the inks highlighted and I'm going to place in my inks. So I go down to File and Place. And then I'm going to get my ink lines BMP. Now, once you place your inks, I recommend locking those in place. And then we highlight the color layer. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go down to File, Place, and I'm going to select Ink Color PSD. Hit OK. And then I'm going to lock the layer. Now, my inks, we're not seeing anything under here. So if we hit OK, what we need to do is we need to tell InDesign that the background for our inks can be transparent. So I'm just going to go to Window, Effects, and then I'm just going to say Multiply. And that's it. What you can basically do is this is how you're assembling our bitmap inks with Pantone colors. So if we dive into the colors here, there's color swatches, you're going to see the addition of our Pantone here. Now, one thing you can do in InDesign is you can do this thing where you select all unused colors, and then you can delete those. So in the end, in this document, it is only using two colors, black and our Pantone purple. And that's when you know that your document is set up correctly. And that's it. This is how you use spot colors using separate files. I know what you're saying. This is a ton of steps, and you're right. But this is what makes Photoshop and InDesign as well pretty powerful. But once you figure out how you want to set up your file, the two programs do offer automation, which allow users to list a series of functions, specify the settings for each of those functions, and resave everything to a new folder. So it's basically saving the creator from having to repeatedly, edit files one by one over and over again. But again, it's important for me to note that this is one way to set up your files. Photoshop and InDesign are both very layered and capable programs, so slight variations of the settings are going to yield pretty dramatic results in your workflow. So this is your intro lesson, but play around and see what works best for you. And really work, if you are working with a publisher, work with the art director. If you're working with a collective, work with the other artists. And then, you'll find the result that you're looking for. But that's pretty much it. This is 2-color setup using multiple files, and I'll see you around. Bye.